The skin can't tell the difference between what's a threat and what's not a threat anymore. And so it just overactivates on everything.
Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 144 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, we're going to talk about topical steroid withdrawal from the perspective of Chinese medicine and how this very specific segment of Chinese medicine practitioners who really truly understand dermatologic issues are helping those suffering and struggling through topical steroid withdrawal. Because there was so much great information shared, and even information for those who do not have topical steroid withdrawal, looking at reactivity at the level of the skin and the level of the gut, I think you're going to love this conversation. So let's dive straight in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, my guest who's joining me is someone whom I came across because of a lot of the stuff that's going on out there with topical steroid withdrawal, though she does work on other issues with the skin, but that was my primary interest in speaking with her. And I actually got connected to her from one of my guests, Abby Lay. And you guys know Abby because she has been a guest on the show a couple of times, and she connected me with my guest today, Dr. Olivia Hsu Friedman. Dr. Friedman is the owner of Amethyst Holistic Skin Solutions and treats eczema, TSW, or topical steroid withdrawal, psoriasis, and acne patients through her US-based practice, both in person and via video conferencing. And she only uses herbal medicine in her practice. Olivia earned a doctorate in acupuncture and Chinese medicine, as well as a diploma in traditional Chinese medicine dermatology. Outside of the office, she serves on the board of directors of the American Society of Acupuncturists, the advisory board of Learn Skin, and the faculty of the Chicago Integrative Eczema Support Group sponsored by the National Eczema Association. And just so you guys know, you can find her over at her website. It's amethystacu.com, and I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes so you can find her. Dr. Olivia, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I will tell you, this conversation really, it excites me because, and I think I should preface this for everyone listening, I have worked and do have a number of clients that have topical steroid withdrawal. And the amazing thing that opened my eyes to the potential that what you're going to talk about today offers somebody going through this is that one of the clients that I have, she really struggled with TSW as a result of using steroids for many, many, many years. And the response from other dermatologists she would see was, here's another steroid cream, try these steroids. And it just got worse and worse. And she was able to find a TCM practitioner local to her who truly changed everything. And we want to be clear here that not all TCM practitioners focus in this area. So that's why I wanted to have you here, because I think the insight that you're going to impart to people who are struggling with this or have this concern today will really be life-changing. So just to frame the conversation, from your perspective, what do you feel or what do you believe topical steroid withdrawal is from the TCM or Chinese medicine perspective?
Well, I would say that essentially the way Western medicine works is we try to find a mechanism that's gone awry, and we try to find a chemical that will shut it down, right? Oftentimes, we're very good at finding that chemical that can do that. But the problem is we're never really looking at, well, what caused that mechanism to go awry in the first place? And what is causing all these other symptoms to happen too? And so as a result, if you keep shutting something down, shutting it down, you're not really solving the problem. And in fact, you're probably causing a larger issue to happen. So the way we look at it in Chinese medicine is that you're basically jamming a system for a long time to the point where it kind of explodes, right? So what happens at that point is the system in general has a lot of different issues now and has been compromised in a lot of different ways. And in order to fix that, we actually have to build that system back up again, or we have to eliminate some of the issues that are causing that system to continually degenerate, and we have to rebuild it. So the way that Chinese medicine actually works in this situation is it helps to kind of do a couple of things. One is you kind of have this fire that's going on, right? And you need to kind of calm that down. So when we talk about inflammation, when we talk about erythema, when we talk about all those kinds of things, we need to get that under control, because that is just continuing to like make things worse and worse. So we need to like calm that down. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we actually need to sort of put up a scaffolding for the body so that we can actually support it while it's rebuilding. Okay, so that's the next thing that Chinese medicine probably does. And then the third thing is it actually helps to rebuild that system, or the many systems that are now probably affected as a result of, all of these other things going wrong. So those are all the things that Chinese medicine does, and that's why it's a customized medicine, because everybody sort of goes through this very differently, and everybody has different parts of their systems that have been affected and different parts of their body that have been affected, and we can actually use herbs that actually address each one of these things. I think what happens with Western medicine is oftentimes we find, again, that one mechanism and that one chemical, but we're not looking at the myriad of symptoms and finding that chemical, I guess, that will affect all of these things, right? And so that's why lots of people are on multiple medicines, right? They have this medicine for this, they have this medicine for that, and before you know it, you're on 7 different medications to handle this one skin condition that you have, right? So Chinese medicine looks at it more like, let's look at the whole entire system and let's figure out what are all the different herbs that are actually going to help to address the picture that you're presenting. And we look at it as everybody has a different reason for having these things. There could be constitutional issues that are sort of making you more prone to certain things. There could be lifestyle choices that are leading to this, and there could be a deficiency in your body to begin with that has never been resolved, and as a result you're just more prone to these kinds of things. So we look at all of these things, and I think people are really surprised when they come in to see me, and the initial intake can be up to 60 minutes because we're talking about every little part of their life and how all of these different things could have been playing into their skin condition. We're not just looking at them and saying, oh, you have this and this is what your lesion looks like. We're looking at every single system that's behind the scenes that's probably playing a part in this.
And I think one of the complicated things is that, number one, topical steroid withdrawal is not just specific to topical steroids, because steroid exposure is a concern, right? It comes from inhalers, different medications. I mean, we can end up with this chronic long-term exposure from a number of different avenues, which is quite easy, especially with over-the-counter medications. We assume, unfortunately, that over-the-counter means you can take as much of it as you want. It's probably not going to do any harm, and that's not always the case. But then that also, this can impact people with all different types of skin issues. And you were sharing with me some really interesting information about how do we get here where steroids tend to be the thing that is the crutch, the go-to crutch. Every time you walk in with a rash, whether it's psoriasis or seborrheic dermatitis, a lot of times, or eczema, it's like, here's a steroid cream. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it was sort of like the wonder drug when it was invented, right? Because it was the very first one that dealt with inflammation and was able to settle a lot of different instances of issues, right? So I think it became a very easy go-to. And in things that are probably not as serious, it works, and you can get it over the counter. It's a very easy thing to, it's very accessible. And for some minor things, it is a really helpful medication. The problem is when things start to become more serious. And I think oftentimes we think, the thinking is often, if a little bit is good, then a lot is better.
Yeah.
And so we have, various levels of steroids that increase in their strength. And so I think that mentality is applied to a lot of these skin diseases as well as like lung conditions and other things that they use steroids for. But the problem again is that we're looking at one mechanism and we're solving it with one chemical instead of looking at the entire system and saying, what are all these things that are leading to these specific symptoms? So I think that's where we're not completely treating the whole body, and we're looking at too small of a perspective when we're trying to treat disease.
Yeah, you get lost amongst the trees. You get lost within the forest amongst the trees. And you know what? To be fair, I think the same goes for some of the, we'll just say like the lifestyle changes that people like to make with skin issues. And I want to mention this now before we dive into like, what are some of the ways that you look at topical steroid withdrawal? Because I want to offer this and as well as what you do to people listening to this who are seeking out help, because topical steroid withdrawal is frankly, like I've always said, living with skin rashes is hell. Topical steroid withdrawal is like some really deeper level of hell to go through. It's very hard. It can drive you to dark places that you never imagined you could go. And without appropriate support, I don't know how you make it through that tunnel unless you've just got some really deep desire to keep on going, because a lot of people struggle tremendously. And so some of the steps that they will take is they'll read online, oh, well, I'm going to clean up my diet. I'm going to eat like super clean. I'm going to only eat these fruits and vegetables because these things have whatever in them. And I'm going to get rid of this. And the diet gets whittled down and they think that that's going to fix it. Or they're, like, what are your thoughts on that initial step when you're at the point where your skin is addicted to steroids?
I think people have to take a better or have a better understanding of where are you in the progression of your disease, right? And at certain points, it does make sense to look at your diet and to change your diet and to improve it. And let's not get me wrong. I mean, it's always a good idea to eat healthy, right?
Yes,
I mean,
we can agree.
That's always a good thing. However, if you're further along in your condition, those simple changes are not going to make a big enough difference because your system has now been compromised. And beyond being compromised, it probably is not functioning properly, and it's probably broken down to some degree, right? And it needs to be fixed. So what you could have done with nutrients at the earlier stages is now no longer the answer. I think the way to look at it is, if you break your arm, you're not going to bring out a Band-Aid and fix it that way, okay? You actually probably have to go to an orthopedic surgeon and have it reset and be put in a cast, and you probably will have to take some serious drugs too, because the pain is going to be horrendous. So it's kind of looking at that way. Like, I think lots of times when people think of diet as being their solution, it's that Band-Aid to the broken arm.
And topical steroid withdrawal is it's a beast. And when you've gotten to the point where your body is so mixed up about whether it should be producing cortisol and what needs to happen, and your hair's falling out and you are just like can't sleep and everything is thrown off, I think, at least from my experience working with clients, is that no matter what you do with your diet, I think cleaning it up is important. I completely agree with you, but I also agree that focusing and fixating on that as being the one way forward, and being like, oh my gosh, it's got to be a food sensitivity, or I must have a food allergy. It must be the food. I think at that point.
Well, I think it's also, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's also a sense of control, right? Because if you have something like TSW, your whole life and body is out of control, right? And it's trying to find something that you can gain control with again. And diet is something that you can control, right? And it is something you can think about and puzzle out, well, if I ate this, this set it out or whatever. The problem is that I think lots of times people focus on so many different food groups that they end up not eating enough to really have the nutrients to heal. So I really talk to my patients a lot about diet. And I think that if you have a definite food that's definitely setting you off every single time, well, you know what? It's probably an allergy then. It's probably not, the food group itself specifically, right? And the other part of it is that when your skin has been so compromised, you then become sensitive to everything, right? I mean, things that were once benign are now an issue. And I think a lot of people forget that skin, while they always look on the outside, right? That is your protective barrier to the outside world, right? But a lot of people don't recognize that that skin is also what's going on in your mouth, also going on in your trachea, going on in your esophagus, and going on in your stomach. All of that skin is exposed to the outer world too. And when this skin starts to become compromised, that skin does too. And as a result, you become so much more sensitive to everything. So 1 week, you can probably find that when you eat this food, it's triggering you. And the next week, you'll eat the same food and it's not. And it's really because the skin can't tell the difference between what's a threat and what's not a threat anymore. And so it just overactivates on everything.
That's a great point, actually. That is a great point that you bring up. And that makes me also kind of wonder too, like, so one of my clients, and I was sharing this with you before we started, was we realized at a certain point that what was probably going on here was TSW. She found someone locally through TCM Dermatology, I think it's .org. And that was so game changing for her. Like, not overnight. I don't want to oversell here, guys. Like, you're listening to this, you're going, oh, I need to find someone. Tomorrow I'll feel better. Like, that's not how it works. It's a road. It's a long road. But it was the first time with the help of the TCM dermatology doctor that she really was starting to see relief. Like, her hair wasn't falling out as much. She was able to control body temperature more. Her skin wasn't as bad. She even in her voice sounded just so much stronger.
Yeah.
So what is it about what you do that can support someone who is going through topical steroid withdrawal?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. As I mentioned before, we're offering not just something that's quelling the symptoms that are going on. We're actually helping to rebuild the body system so that it actually is working properly again, right? And another thing that I want to add is that because we do spend probably a lot more time with our patients, there is that personal connection that allows us time to actually talk about things from an emotional and psychological issue as well. And that's an area where I really spend a lot of time with my patients, is really listening to them and hearing how they're going through this experience and helping them work with the emotional psychological component of it. Because I mean, that is oftentimes, it's not an area that you talk about a lot in the Western world, right? I mean, and it's a huge part of any sort of illness, right? One of the things that I found really interesting is that, you know, in the Western world, we think of, if you have something like a TSW, your skin then becomes, you know, this very, very red, or, you know, very, lots of times it doesn't look great, right? At the end of the day, it will affect how you feel about yourself. It'll affect how you think about yourself, right? And in the Western way, we think of it as, this is your reaction to what you've got. But in the Eastern way, we think, no, you actually have this condition, and as part of these symptoms, there's an emotional symptom that comes with that too. And you will start to feel this way as a result. And as your skin improves, those emotions will also recalibrate too. So we think of it more as a symptom and part of the pattern of your condition versus your reaction to having this skin condition. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about the emotional psychological component of their condition through TSW. I mean, like you mentioned a number of times, I mean, this is something where I have met up with a lot of people who are suicidal. I have met up with a lot of people who are in and out of the hospital. I've met a lot of people who have lost their jobs as a result of having this condition. They are now isolated.
And you lose your relationships a lot of times as well.
They're isolated from a lot of people because a lot of people also don't understand what's going on with them. And they, you know, they try to offer well-meaning advice, and it's really very misguided. So it's a very, very lonely road. And so these are a lot of the things I talk about with my patients, and I try to help them find their way back as well. So I think that's another part of healing, is really dealing with that part as well. And I think it's something that speaks to the whole body versus this idea of you are like a car who has this part that's broken and needs to be fixed. And then, you know, in 20 minutes, like, you're all better. Like, that's not the way the body works.
No,
It's so
it's
much
not.
more complicated than that.
And you use herbs as part of the process. I'm just kind of curious, like, is it the same type of herbs like that you would use for other issues, or does topical steroid withdrawal tend to have maybe a set of herbs that are kind of more specific to it? I'm just kind of curious how that works.
There are a lot of different herbs that can be used in skin diseases. There are some that overlap depending on what the condition actually is, and then there's some that are very specific to different things. I would also add that because it's a very customized medicine, we're looking at people as individuals, and we're saying, what's going on with you that's different than somebody else? How are you constitutionally different than somebody else, and therefore need different kinds of herbs to support that? How do you live, and how does that support what's going on with your condition as well? So there are some herbs that are common, and it's funny because I have treated a bunch of people who are on the same Facebook group, and they'll start comparing the herbs that are in their formula, and they'll say, "Oh, well, Olivia gave me this, this, and this. What about you?" and and they'll see that there's some similar herbs, but what they don't understand is like the ratio could be very different, and how long they're actually going to be on that particular herb as well can be very different. And what they might start out with might be very different than what they're going to be on next week. So they think they have the secret sauce, and they'll say, "Oh, well, Olivia gave me 10 herbs, this must be the secret for TSW." And it's like,
No.
well, it's a secret for you for this moment, but like next week it may not be.
Yeah.
Try to give that to somebody else, you might not get the same results because they're very different situations.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think it's worthwhile mentioning is that not all acupuncturists, no matter whether they're like, my sister is 5 elements, she learned 5 elements acupuncture, and your TCM, but not everybody specializes in skin. Like, you're part of this very specific subset of acupuncturists that have specialized in skin conditions.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does that, like, why should someone look for that if they're really struggling? I'm not saying that they shouldn't go to somebody that they trust in their own community, but your specialty is different.
Yeah. I would say it's very similar to the way we actually have practitioners in the Western world. If you have a skin disease, chances are you're not going to a general practitioner or a pediatrician or whatever. You're probably going to somebody who's a dermatologist. And it's the same thing in Eastern medicine. Somebody who's gotten a specific degree in a particular area is obviously going to know a lot more about that. If you spend 2 years studying dermatology, you're going to know more than somebody who was trying to learn, a general sense of how the body works and things like that. And I think that it's really important for people to understand that there are specialties in Eastern medicine as well. Just because you're an acupuncturist doesn't mean that you're an herbalist. Just because you're an herbalist doesn't mean that you're a dermatologist. So you really have to look at people's training and really look at, is your problem something that they specialize in? And if it is, you'll kind of want to see how much training they've had. Somebody who has studied with Mazen El-Kafaji in Eastern medicine for dermatology is more likely to be able to solve your problems for dermatology than somebody who did not. Dr. El-Kafaji is considered the master. In Chinese medicine, we study with masters, and we follow them, probably throughout our careers to gain, more and more information about those particular areas. In Western medicine, you can go to any number of universities and probably study dermatology. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, you want to see somebody who has that certification in dermatology. And then even in dermatology, lots of times we have people who specialize in different types of dermatological conditions. I happen to specialize in TSW because I started seeing some patients and then helped them, and then they just started sending more and more people. So I feel like I'm in a better place to help and serve people who have TSW. but I'll be honest, there's a lot of people who have never seen anybody who has TSW and are not familiar with it, but they might be awesome at acne or psoriasis or whatever. And I think different regions of the United States oftentimes lend themselves to different conditions as well. I mean, I know somebody who's in Hawaii and they're in a very damp types of climate all the time, so they come up with fungal diseases and all those kinds of things, and they're great at that. And then I have people who, practice in Denver and it's super dry and they have, every single skin disease that has anything to do with dryness. So, I think where you're located and the types of patients who come to you can then, make you a specialist. I mean, just like Dr. Leo is a specialist in eczema, right? So.
And here's another good question. With the support of someone like yourself who specializes in TCM dermatology, but you also have a lot of experience with topical steroid withdrawal. So if someone comes into your practice, and I know, and we all know, everybody's listening, we all know that everybody's journey is unique. But normally, if your condition, your case is pretty severe, how long have you found in your practice that it takes someone to start feeling more like themselves? I don't want to say 100% better because I'm not even 100% sure what that is for everybody. And sometimes everybody's like, I feel better is not exactly where they thought they'd be, but it's way better than where they were. So what does that, because I think setting expectations is important. What do you tell your patients about what they should expect from a time frame perspective?
I would say, like you've already alluded to, it does depend on the person. And this is why, because it really depends on how many systems have been compromised and how much damage has been done. So you kind of have to go and start the process and see how well you respond. But I usually find that patients see changes all along the way if we're on the right track. For example, they can be more subtle at the beginning where, I've treated someone with TSW who could not sleep through the night. And, without sleep, it's really hard to heal in general. In the first few weeks that we started working, she realized that she was getting more and more sleep and that she was actually sleeping through the night by the time we got to 1 month. And she's like, this is really amazing. Like, I have not slept for years, and then as we continued to work together, she had full sleeves of red erythema, and within the next couple months, like, that completely went away. So you're going to see changes all along the way as long as we're on the right course for you, but they just might be not directly your skin. They could be things like your sleep. They could be like, suddenly you don't find yourself being so irritated all the time, or suddenly you may not be as itchy. I have had patients say to me, it's funny, I can't remember the last time I itched. And like, I used to itch all the time. So it's things like this where it's not like overnight where you just go, oh, I'm not itching at all anymore. But, I'll usually ask questions and people will say, I never really thought about that. I don't think I itched yesterday. I don't think I itched the day before that. That's kind of interesting,
Yeah.
So I usually tell people to give themselves 3 months. And the reason I say that is because in the very beginning, I usually do like a little bit of a trial with the herbal formulas to make sure people can handle them, that they can handle the taste, that, they don't have to make a huge investment to see what it's like. We also sort of gauge how they're responding to it and whether or not that dosage is right for them. Once we get past that trial, they start to take longer doses of it, and then we meet like every couple of weeks. During that time period, I usually have to change the herbs a little bit to kind of make sure we're addressing it for their particular constitution, their particular situation. And I kind of have to play with it a little bit. And so we kind of have to see, how people respond. But usually within the next couple of weeks, like, they'll start to see things happen. And by the 3-month period, you usually can tell, how quickly you've responded and kind of guess like how much longer you want to do this. And most people are very incentivized when they see progress to keep going.
Yeah.
I've also had people, it's not always a linear progression where you're awful one day and then you're great at 3 months. Like, it's usually a little bit of back and forth. I would say you typically will still have a little bit of flaring, but the goal is to get you to a point where the intensity of the flares go down and the frequency of the flares is much much more limited. And so, you get to this point where when you first start with me, you're kind of like up and down, up and down, up and down, like on your own. But then you start to take the herbs and maybe it's more like, a curve like this, right? And then maybe as you continue to take the herbs, you're more like this,
Right.
And over time, the goal is like to not have them at all. So usually if you can see that progress, then you realize that, this is working for me and you keep going. I mean, I've had people who they start to question me and they're like, I'm not sure if this is really working for me. I think I'm not going to take this anymore. And so they go off for a few weeks and then all of a sudden all these symptoms come back and I get a call from them and like, well, okay, so I didn't think it was working, but I haven't been taking herbs and now I'm like way worse. So obviously it was doing something, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think it's about opening up your mind and creating space for that type of hope that something is working, because you get a lot of times you become so negative that it's hard to believe that anything can even help you. And that's one reason why I wanted to talk to more people like yourself who are either working with or living with TSW, because I think we need to have more stories put out there, and not just to help people recognize this issue, but also to find ways forward and to know that there is hope, there is potential. And I really have loved supporting my client that has gone through this, who's working with a TCM dermatology acupuncturist and has really seen a lot of improvement. And I've just been so impressed, and I'm glad that I could have you here. And I wanted to make sure everybody knew, so you do have a newsletter that they can sign up for, and you do offer consults no matter where people live, anywhere in the US. Is that pretty specific to the US, or you do work from outside? You do with
I've actually taken on a bunch of international patients recently too. Yeah.
Perfect. But they can find you at amethystacu.com. And that way I'll put that in the show notes so that everybody can find your link easily and go check you out and connect with you there. But I just wanted to thank you so much for joining this. This has been a fantastic and super interesting conversation. And it really makes me hopeful in sharing this, that other people will find their answers and stop banging their head against the wall trying to do it with things that, like you said, there's a point when a Band-Aid can help, but then after a certain point, we got to let the Band-Aids go and really work with something that has the capacity to move the marker forward when the system is so debilitated at that point. And I'm glad that people can have you as a resource for that. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I really appreciated being able to talk with you today.
I am so appreciative to have had Dr. Friedman on the show. I'm looking forward to having her back some other time. Everything we talked about today can be found over in the show notes at skinterrupt.com/144. There, you can also leave any questions, comments, or thoughts about this episode. That way we can keep the conversation going. And if you know anyone dealing with topical steroid withdrawal, or you suspect that they are, make sure to share this episode with them. This information needs to get out there. That way we can help those who are struggling and feeling so alone because they can't get answers and are just not feeling better. And before you head off for your day, make sure to head to your podcast platform of choice, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. That way the next episode lands on your mobile device. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.